people really know what they would do if they're not actually doing it. They're just telling you what they would do.
Yeah. Well, here's one of my ideas. So I'm thinking about how do you translate what we learn into something that people can understand? Obviously books, whatever. But one of the things that quilting groups do, conventions and guilds, is they have people come and give classes. So one of the thoughts I had with the controlled experiments is to have a class that's sort of about creativity and all of that, and set it up so that, as you said, that you have so you say, okay, here's ideas. So the first is we're going to make a quilt. And we're going to make it in 2 hours. You have to figure out the idea. You have to decide where it's coming from, what you're doing, and then incentivize it so that you can kind of talk to people about as they get through each stage, like, well, where did you get the idea? Can you do that? That kind of copyright police thing. But I think if you could structure it a way where the class is not only sort of having them sort of live copyright, so they understand sort of the nature of what copyright is, but then also doing it as a controlled experiment, it would be super interesting because you could teach this class in a variety of different places with different people to see if that changes depending on if it's a church guild or if it's modern quilt guild or something like that, of what they do and how they approach creativity, and then how protective they are. Well, first of all, how protective they are of what they've done. How valuable do they think what they have? And then also what resources they use, because I seem to see people super protective of what they've done, but not recognizing they've borrowed from other people, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, but what you're describing, so let me just say that typically in a lab experiment, you can test one thing. So the key between a lab experiment is like random assignment of subjects to either a control group or a treatment group. And there's only one difference between the experience of the control group and the experience of the treatment group. Everything stays still except for one thing. And your only interest is if that one thing causes people's behavior to change. If it does, then you can pretty reliably assign that one thing as the causative factor. Now, what you're talking about, there's like a million things that could be varying. So the question is always like, lab experiments are always highly stylized. Right? They're always like very much abstracted from reality. This is both their strength and their weakness. The strength is that allows you to assign very specific causal agency to the factor that you're varying if it turns out it drives behavior. The weakness is it's very difficult then to say, well, okay, so this is a definitive account of how the world behaves.
Right.
It's a pretty definitive account of how your experimental subjects behaved in the very artificial conditions in which you have them do their work.
Got it.
But whether that actually chains up to the real world is a complex question.
Right.
So, that if you go through the recent IP experiments, they are, in a way, they're very simple, right? But it's a matter of great complexity to boil messy reality down to that simplicity. So a lot of the work that goes into experiments goes into that simplicity, creating that simplicity.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to think more of it. I can't quite imagine it, but I do think it would be interesting to think about. Sort of, I think it's sort of this role of creativity and possessiveness of creativity, which is kind of interesting. And how far do you have to go in being creative till you believe you have the right to control it? And that's the spectrum that I'm really curious about. And obviously for an industry like this, the spectrum often is an economic one where they feel like someone feels like someone's taking something they shouldn't and they're not getting paid for it. Right? That's the breaking point on a different level. But that's really interesting. Super, super interesting. Okay. So before we end, so this project is it's fun to be in a beginning project after 10 years on a different project, but it's a little daunting because it feels like there's way too much. And thinking through what the strategy is of this is, and also there's so many different elements to it. So we're going to break that down during this next semester and start to think about it. But do you have any suggestions or thoughts? Like when you start these projects, how do you begin them?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about beginning a project so we get off on the right foot?
Yeah. So it seems to me that what you're doing really is a kind of nice project to begin as a qualitative project.
Yeah.
So one of the real values of qualitative projects, so, you know, they don't have a lot of math in them, and so maybe they don't look as impressive on the page as a quantitative project.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the real values of a qualitative project it allows you, if you have the time and the patience, to tell through interviews a very complex, textured story about how something happens, about how creativity happens in a particular field, and this would be quilting. And about, you know, some important questions like what do people think of property in this field, and why do they think they might have property? When do they think they don't? You know, what do they think about appropriation? When is it wrong? When is it unobjectionable? Right? So all these questions, through a carefully done qualitative study, you can get some real textured understanding of. Now, when you do that sets up potentially some narrow questions that are interesting and that might be more amenable to quantitative study, either through surveys or experiments or some kind of natural experiment. But, you know, qualitative work is often incredibly valuable because it sets the table.
Yeah.
It helps guide you.
So yeah, I think that, and I am starting to see the landscape. It's really interesting. And sort of the idea of that one is to be able to map, what does the quilting world look like? What are the different areas and people, and how do they interact, and who are they, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of
right.
That's what the qualitative project is, and we'll continue.
I'm eager to follow your progress.
I love it. Thanks, Chris, for your time. I know it's super valuable, and you are insanely awesome. So thanks again for today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Okay, bye.
Bye. So this is Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. You've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. We want to hear from you. Join our army, our quilting army. Go to our Facebook page. Suggest people to be interviewed. Suggest yourself to be interviewed. We are excited to hear from you. But most importantly, I hope you get a chance to quilt today.